This is Dawn, Luther at Erfurt, painted in 1861 by Sir Joseph Noel Paton. It depicts the priest Martin Luther experiencing a crisis of faith and arriving at the doctrine sola fide, translating to by faith alone. This set of beliefs offered a new understanding of forgiveness in the eyes of God. In this moment, Luther is destroyed, a man broken by revelation and horrified by the religious texts he has devoted his life to and the realization that they, at least in his eyes, are wrong. From this moment, Luther would go on to publish his 95 Theses, a systemic criticism of the Catholic Church that kick-started a revolution known as the Reformation, which, as the name suggests, looked to reform and restore Christianity to the Bible's original word. This started a cultural war within Christianity, in which reformers formed their own denomination, Protestants, and Catholics doubled down on their extravagance, convincing followers of their Bible with beauty rather than scripture. This opulent style and the motivation behind it is known as Baroque. So how does Paton choose to depict this pivotal point in history, which butterflied massive catalysts in cultural history such as Catholics versus Protestants and art history with Baroque period? How did he portray this moment? Quiet and painful. This painting doesn't really care about grand religious conflict. It's not making a religious or political statement. It's about emotion, the destruction of will and soul. To feel this, all you need to do is examine Luther's body. His eyes are drifting, unable to focus on a single point. The asymmetry in his cheeks and drooped jaw, as if his body has lost all energy, even allowing the skin on his face to melt away from the skeleton underneath. He's in a state of lifelessness, disassociated with everything. He's not crying or angry. The hurt has frozen him. It's also interesting to note these qualities transcend the frame. Imagine you're looking at this painting in person, in an 1800s gallery. The movement of people around exacerbating Luther's frozen state, but the silence of that atmosphere lending itself to the feeling of quietude in the painting. Moving outwards, we notice the difference in skin tone of his hands and wrists compared to his discoloured face, showing us this is not a physical illness, but a spiritual one. His cloak shrouding him in darkness away from the burgeoning sun and concealing the white garments that too painfully remind him of his former faith. A system that has left him in, or maybe with, this monastery alone. And what I mean by with is that the monastery feels like a character too. It feels alive, as if it has a motive to either bring Luther back to Catholicism or suffocate him before he becomes a problem for the church. Luther is surrounded by religious imagery designed to replace his social needs with devotion to symbolic figures such as Christ and, more controversially, the Pope. The suffocation Luther feels is explained to us through the placement of these symbols, arranged in a tight triangle, pinning Luther in. Despite these symbols all representing Catholic figures, each serve a different role in Luther's revelation. The character at the back is St. Augustine of Hippo, a preeminent influence for Luther and a figure many Protestants would later regard as a forefather of the theology behind the Reformation. Next is a portrait of the Pope overshadowing Luther in his solace. Apparently this portrait also covers a mural of the crucified Christ, hinting at the corruption of the Catholic Church, which Luther will rebel against. Although, I'm sorry, I can't see it. I can tell there's something painted on the wall, but I can't make it out, so it's your call whether that's a thing or not. And then finally, there's Christ. The placement of Christ suggests he's looking directly up at Luther, praying and pleading for him to come back to Catholicism. Then, if you're familiar with the scene depicted on the lectern, another interpretation comes up. This scene is the agony of Christ in the garden, in which Christ prays to God after the Last Supper, anguishing his impending fate. The inclusion of this episode mirrors and echoes Luther's own uncertainties. This suffocation designed by the environment is furthered by the skull and hourglass, applying pressure on Luther through the constant reminder of mortality. And when we combine the skull with all the other characters in the painting, something becomes epiphanically clear. All the heads are turning left, except Luther's, which is turning right. Luther is in complete opposition with his environment. By putting Luther at odds with everything in his surroundings, Paton intensifies this sense of loneliness, which I actually think is the first indication of opinion from Paton, and that he agrees with Luther that the Catholic Church is apostatized. This is because loneliness should be the opposite of religion. Religion is about a collective, people united in their faith to a way of life or set of beliefs. For Luther to be experiencing such loneliness at the work of his environment is a failure of religion and abandonment by the church. Of course, the monastery isn't alive, Jesus isn't looking at Luther, all these elements within the painting are nods to Luther's interiority. They are clues to understanding the extent of his despair so that the viewer can feel his experience. Through this painting, Paton shows a person's inner mind without ever entering it.